Under the CCP's brainwashing, when faced with issues of social justice, many Chinese people's most common response is, "Don't discuss these things with me, I just want to live my own life, I don't care about politics." However, while you may not care about politics, politics is meticulously caring for every ordinary person in this country. Look, this is a gas station in China right now. This is a recent scene of Chinese drivers panicking and rushing to gas stations amidst rising oil prices. There were likely over 1,000 vehicles lined up in long queues. On March 10th, China's National Development and Reform Commission announced an increase in domestic retail prices for gasoline and diesel. Gasoline rose by 695 yuan per ton, equivalent to a rise of $101 per ton, and diesel by 670 yuan per ton, equivalent to a rise of $98 per ton. This is one of the largest single price adjustments in recent years. Long lines formed at gas stations in many cities, with many complaining that with daily price increases, it's impossible to even get gas. Does anyone know what's going on today? Why are so many people filling up their gas? Look, all those gas cans, big and small, it's all cars. Look at that. Everyone's saying gasoline prices are going up, so I'm following suit and queuing up. Look, everyone's queuing up. I say owners of gasoline-powered cars are really the ones who get bullied. Purchase tax, vehicle tax, fuel tax, surcharges, they pay them all. Making a living is already hard enough, and they still have to worry about the international situation. The Middle East conflict has triggered a violent shock in the global energy market. Iran has threatened to attack ships passing through the Strait of Hormuz, bringing this vital maritime energy route to a near standstill. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow passage along the Iranian coast, connecting the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. Approximately 20% of the world's oil and natural gas is typically transported through this strait. Since the outbreak of the war on February 28th, Iran has repeatedly attacked merchant ships attempting to pass through the Strait of Hormuz, effectively blocking the waterway. If oil prices continue to rise, major oil importing countries including China, Europe, and India will be impacted, while oil exporting countries such as Russia, Canada, and Norway will benefit. As for the US, while rising fuel costs will squeeze incomes and impact consumers, the overall economy will be less affected due to its status as an oil exporter, thanks to shale oil. For the CCP, this crisis is more like a boomerang. China has consistently been one of the few buyers of goods from countries under severe sanctions. Following the US arrest of former Venezuelan President Maduro earlier this year, Venezuelan ports completely halted crude oil shipments to China. Now, with ongoing military strikes against Iran, the Strait of Hormuz is effectively shut down. China legally purchases over 7 million barrels of Middle Eastern crude oil daily, in addition to undisclosed shipments via shadowy vessels. China is the world's largest importer of oil and natural gas, relying on imports for 73% of its crude oil consumption and 40% of its natural gas consumption. Approximately 50% of its crude oil imports and 16% of its natural gas imports pass through the Strait of Hormuz. According to publicly available data, Iran and Venezuela combined account for approximately 17 to 18% of China's seaborne crude oil imports, totaling between 1.76 million and 1.85 million barrels per day. The actual figure is likely much higher. CNBC reported on March 10th that Iran continues to export large quantities of oil through the Strait of Hormuz amidst the conflict, with only one destination, China. Nevertheless, it can be inferred that the scale is far smaller than before the outbreak of the war. Compared to the seemingly harmonious relationship between the Iranian theocratic government and the CCP, the Iranian people have a completely opposite attitude towards the Chinese there. Look, this is from 2 weeks ago. A Chinese woman was videoing on the street when a local knocked her phone out of her hand. Another woman in a black robe told her to leave quickly. A Chinese blogger on the X platform claims that many Chinese people in Iran are now calling for help. They say that Iranians have started capturing Chinese people. People from other countries are not in danger, only the Chinese are being targeted, and a $500,000 payment can get them out. Iranians believe that the Chinese people are helping the Iranian government persecute Iranians, and they will not be lenient towards the Chinese. If you don't have money, you won't survive. This young man in Iran, holding his ID card, recounts how he was robbed. The Chinese embassy in Iran refused to help him, and he has been hungry for 37 hours. When I was abroad, I was robbed. My wallet and passport were all taken. I live in constant fear. My biggest wish now is to return home as soon as possible, but there's nothing I can do. At the same time, almost every Chinese person in China has been affected by the sudden Middle East conflict. In particular, with oil tankers halting operations to avoid risks and supply disruptions increasing, crude oil and chemical raw material prices have fluctuated wildly, creating triple pressure on China's industrial chain. Raw material supply disruptions, soaring costs, and logistical obstacles which are highly dependent on energy and chemical raw material imports. As mentioned, approximately 20 million barrels of crude oil pass through the Strait of Hormuz daily, accounting for about 1/5 of global oil consumption. China's dependence on crude oil imports is about 72%, with about half coming from the Middle East, and the vast majority of these shipments passing through this strait. If navigation is disrupted, both energy and chemical raw material supplies will face pressure. As the world's largest oil importer, China has continued to expand its oil imports in recent years. Data released by China's General Administration of Customs shows that China's crude oil imports in 2025 will reach approximately 578 million tons, averaging about 11.55 million barrels per day, a record high. The Chinese Communist Party is highly dependent on imported oil, but lacks a transparent and stable energy policy. Beijing has long relied on energy transactions with authoritarian regimes such as Iran, superficially obtaining cheap crude oil, but in reality it has consistently failed to establish a truly stable and reliable energy security system. Let's first look at energy. The recent surge in oil prices has impacted many grassroots industries and ordinary people in China. A notice circulating within China's logistics industry dated March 8, 2026, titled Freight Adjustment Notice, states that due to recent continuous rise in refined oil prices and a significant increase in transportation costs, the company has decided to adjust existing freight rates to maintain normal operations and service quality. The new freight rate standard will take effect immediately. The notice also states that this price adjustment is a last resort and hopes for the understanding and cooperation of cargo owners and logistics operators. Industry insiders believe that such notices indicate that rising oil prices are beginning to exert pressure on the transportation industry. Mr. Zhang, a logistics company manager in Guangdong, told overseas Chinese media that fuel costs typically account for more than 30% of transportation costs. He said, "Fuel prices have suddenly surged due to the situation in the Middle East. If this continues, some small logistics companies may struggle to survive. Some logistics companies in Northeast China have already begun to shut down. If you want to transport goods from the Northeast to North and East China, the profit margins are already very thin, and now many companies are already unable to hold on." A long-haul truck driver said, "Our line of work is already barely surviving. With the rise in fuel prices, profits are almost gone. The higher-ups are playing games in international politics, but in the end, it's we truck drivers who bear the burden. If prices continue to rise like this, many drivers may really have to give up." With oil prices constantly rising, the cost pressure on our logistics operations is enormous. A dozen cents more per liter of fuel doesn't seem like much, but driving a truck is a real money pit, directly wiping out all our meager profits. A fully loaded truck travels over 1,000 kilometers, and in the end, we're even losing money. I know several of my peers are struggling and can't survive. Plastics are considered industrial master batch. The rapid rise in energy prices have been transmitted to the chemical industry chain, with China's plastics market being the first to be severely impacted. The Jiangmu Tao plastics trading market in Dongguan City, Guangdong Province has an annual transaction volume of nearly $14 billion, accounting for about 1/10 of China's plastics materials market, and is considered an important industry indicator. According to price tracking reports from Sunsurs and Oil Chem and feedback from industry insiders, following the outbreak of the Middle East conflict in the week of March 2nd and 9th, spot prices of upstream raw materials such as ABS resin and polycarbonate experienced a jump in price increases amid market panic. Prices in some regions approached 40%, and some categories even saw price changes every hour. That town has entered a rush to secure goods, leading to significant changes in logistics and warehousing. At the entrance of a plastic raw material warehouse in Jiangmutou, long lines of trucks from all over South China waited to be loaded and unloaded. One driver told a Chinese media reporter that he had been queuing there every day since early March, and what used to take 1 or 2 hours to load and unload goods had taken him nearly 6 hours today. Before, I could handle 2 or 3 orders a day, but now I work from morning till night and only complete 1. This has been the case for the past few days. The queues are always this long. According to data from Plast.com, the largest plastic-themed e-commerce platform in South China, there has been a recent surge in views on plastic raw material prices. The most significant price increases are seen in domestic general-purpose ABS plastic raw materials, which have risen from 8,000 yuan per ton to over 13,000 yuan per ton since March 1st, and domestic general-purpose PC plastic raw materials, which have risen from 11,000 yuan per ton to over 16,000 yuan per ton, representing increases of over 60% and 40% respectively. According to price tracking, the price of engineering plastic polycarbonate has risen from a low of 11,000 yuan per ton last year to 14,000 to 15,000 yuan per ton. This material is widely used in the manufacture of mobile phone and laptop casings, security windows and soundproof walls, safety shields, and drinking water containers. Products essential to people's daily lives. The rapid rise in raw material prices in the short term have put enormous pressure on China's midstream processing enterprises. The head of packaging materials company in Zhengzhou, Henan, told overseas Chinese media frankly, upstream manufacturers have raised prices significantly, and costs are being passed down to downstream companies at each level. Midstream processing companies like ours have almost no profit margin, and many companies feel it's not worthwhile to continue. Besides plastic materials, many chemical raw materials are also facing supply pressure. Iran is not only an oil-producing country, but also a major supplier of chemical raw materials, with the methanol market being particularly sensitive to the situation. The Strait of Hormuz carries approximately 35% of global maritime methanol trade. The Iranian war has directly cut off this vital chain for Middle Eastern supplies to enter Asia. According to monitoring by the Zhengzhou Community Exchange (ZCE) and Business Society, methanol prices have risen by 20 to 25% since March, with import-dependent MMA producers in East China being the hardest hit. Although China has a methanol production capacity of approximately 118 million tons, it still relies on imports for 12 to 15% of its consumption, with about 60% coming from Iran. China's liquefied petroleum gas market is also highly dependent on Middle Eastern supplies, which account for over 70% of imports, with 45.8% transiting the Strait of Hormuz. Compared to the end of February, the cumulative price increase in the first 9 days of March has exceeded 20%. According to data from the energy agency ICIS, about a quarter of China's LPG imports come from Iran. The dual pressure of rising oil prices and transportation disruptions have forced a tightening of market supply. Therefore, the impact of the current Middle East conflict on China's chemical industry is not just the rise in oil prices, but the combined pressures of raw material supply disruptions, soaring costs, and logistical obstacles. The Chinese refer to the 3 large state-owned enterprises PetroChina, CNOOC, and Sinopec, which hold a monopolistic position as the 3 barrels of oil. For the Chinese, gasoline has always been expensive. While the prices in China are lower than the world average and may not seem high, China's per capita disposable income is only a fraction of that of developed countries, making oil prices relatively expensive. Ironically, despite the high oil prices borne by the Chinese, these large state-owned enterprises frequently report significant losses in this corrupt country. I'm just puzzled. In the countries where the war is taking place, gasoline prices haven't increased much, but here, where we, the bystanders, are just watching, prices have gone up. Yesterday it was 5.78 yuan, but this morning when I went to fill up it was 6.08 yuan. Oh, crude oil is rising, so our country's is rising too. You say crude oil affects us, while crude oil prices fall, our country won't. Then you say, I'm different from crude oil. You say your price is rising, fine, but your oil isn't pure either. Okay, it's not pure, fine, but you're short 2 liters. A 45-liter tank shows I filled up with 52 liters. Okay, we won't criticize those, but you still say you're losing money. If you're losing money in business, you can let someone else do it, right? But you say you can't let someone else take your place. It can be predicted that a chain reaction will occur at the end of China's manufacturing industry. The timing of the resolution of the crisis in the Strait of Hormuz will be a key factor influencing market trends. If the crisis lasts only 1 to 2 months, China's market may be able to gradually absorb it through inventory adjustments and alternative supply. However, if it lasts more than 3 months, the global energy and chemical supply chains will face a deeper shock, and resilient Chinese SMEs may face shutdowns or even exit from the market. On the one hand, the CCP invests huge sums of money to maintain its dependence on Middle Eastern energy channels. On the other hand, it lacks institutional arrangements to buffer international risks. When international oil price fluctuations intensify, the pressure often falls first on the domestic transportation industry and ordinary workers. Despite the CCP's continued condemnation of the US and Israel and its expression of support and sympathy for Iran's theocratic regime, many Chinese are gradually becoming aware of the situation. The distant international politics, like the wings of a butterfly, flap across the desert and the Gulf, and the people of the self-proclaimed Great Eastern Power feel the pain. Even if you drive a new energy vehicle, you can't escape it, because your cost of living will rise as oil prices rise. 70% of China's imported oil comes from the Middle East. Once this crucial channel is blocked, it cannot be replaced in the short term, and a rise in domestic gasoline prices is inevitable. Don't think that rising oil prices are only a matter for drivers. If you don't drive, it affects you too. This is a cost increase that covers our entire lives, and everyone has to pay for it. In other words, the CCP has excessively tied the country's energy lifeline to the volatile Middle East. This foolish reliance makes China's transportation, logistics, and even manufacturing industries extremely vulnerable to international shocks. So-called energy security is treated more as a bargaining chip in the CCP's policy logic than as a strategic bottom line concerning the national economy and people's livelihood. That's all for today. If you enjoy our content, please give us a thumbs up, subscribe, leave a comment, and share it with a friend. We appreciate your support, and we'll see you next time.